Hey everybody, it's Ron, and I want to tell you a story about business and how that story changed everything. Before you get too far into this episode, let me just say, don't get comfortable with where you think this story is headed. It's going to end up somewhere you're not expecting, so bear with me. In late August of 1969, a man by the name of Fred Weintraub sat in a boardroom at Warner Brothers Studios in Burbank, California, and did his best to look calmer than he actually felt. A week earlier, without full sign-off from the executives now staring him down across the table, he'd cut a check and sent a film crew chasing something that had, by every early report reaching this room, turned into an absolute mess. Mud, delays, cost already climbing well past what he'd promised. One of the men in that room had already made his opinion known before a single frame was even shot, dismissing the entire idea in 5 flat words that were now getting repeated back to Weintraub like a verdict. Weintraub didn't have much of a defense yet, only a hunch, and a stack of film cans nobody in this room had watched. What none of them could have known, sitting under those fluorescent lights, was what that footage actually held, or what it was about to mean for a studio that was, at that exact moment, closer to going under than any of them wanted to admit out loud in front of each other. So what was actually sitting on those reels, still unseen, still unproven, still just a rumor of mud and noise and money already spent? What did it take to turn a room full of furious executives into the people who ended up saving their own studio almost by accident? And how did 4 days that started on August 15th, 1969, and was supposed to end on this date, but technically didn't end until Jimi Hendrix walked off a stage at 9 in the morning the next day, become the thing that got Fred Weintraub out of that boardroom still employed even after that executive declared that the Woodstock Music Festival movie that the film crew recorded was nothing more than a, quote, documentary about waterlogged hippies. From Business Basics, I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the daily podcast where we explain the stories that changed business forever. Every date on the calendar has a story where business reshaped the world. Today, August 17th, that story takes us to 1969. 400,000 in a field saves Warner Brothers. To understand all of this, we need to start with a man by the name of Michael Lang, who didn't want a festival. He wanted a recording studio, one specific and unglamorous idea he'd been chewing on since early 1969. He wanted it tucked somewhere near the little art colony town of Woodstock, New York, where musicians like Bob Dylan and the band already lived quiet, unbothered lives. He brought that idea to his friend Artie Kornfeld, who was a record executive with connections but no money. And together, the two of them went looking for money from 2 young New Yorkers named John Roberts and Joel Rosenman, who had cash to spend and no real interest in bankrolling recording equipment. What Roberts and Rosenman wanted was a concert, something to fund the studio as a side effect rather than the point itself. 4 men who barely knew each other shook hands on a compromise and named the company after a town none of them had actually secured as a venue yet. They named the company Woodstock Ventures. With all of that in mind, finding somewhere to actually hold the concert turned into its own small disaster. An industrial park in Walk Hill, New York looked secured until local officials pulled the permit just 5 weeks before opening night. They were spooked by residents waving signs targeted at the area dairy industry, and those signs read, "Buy no milk, stop hippie music festival." With the clock running out and nowhere to go, A dairy farmer named Max Yasgur offered up 600 acres of his own land in Bethel, New York, which was 60 miles from the town the whole operation was still named after. Even then, standing in front of Bethel's town board, those 4 young men kept repeating the same number they had told Wallkill months earlier. There will be no more than 50,000 people. Now, by the time the tickets actually went on sale, that number had already needed revising at least once, up to 200,000, since 186,000 tickets had pre-sold before a single fence post went into the ground. By Friday afternoon of the concert, the number was already a lie. 50,000 people had arrived early and simply planted themselves in front of a stage that wasn't finished, and more kept coming, on foot, by car, however they could get there. That was long before the gates were scheduled to open. The fencing, meant to enforce ticket sales, sat half-built, and standing in front of a crowd too large to hold back, those 4 organizers made a decision in real time. They stopped trying. The gates opened for free. What had been a ticketed business became something else entirely. On the spot, without a meeting or a memo, just 4 exhausted men watching their own event slip out of their hands. Then the sky opened up too. Rain turned Yasgur's dairy farm into a shifting sea of mud, thick enough to swallow shoes, cars, and any hope of keeping a schedule on time. Food ran short. Medical tents filled. On Sunday, New York's governor wanted the National Guard sent in, and Roberts, one of the New York City guys with more money than sense, talked him out of it, while Sullivan County did declare a state of emergency around them anyway. Some of the performing acts refused to go on until they were paid in cash on the spot. At one point, Roberts pledged his own trust fund as collateral and got a local bank manager out of bed near midnight to pull the cash out to cover those payments. The numbers on the ledger kept climbing right alongside the numbers in the field. A roughly $500,000 budget swelled towards $3.1 million in total cost, against only $1.8 million actually collected at the gate. And somewhere out there in that same mud, a film crew Kornfeld had quietly hired days earlier kept rolling, capturing all of it. Footage nobody back at Warner Brothers had seen yet. While the festival was scheduled to conclude 57 years ago today on August 17, 1969, which was a Sunday, the schedule fell pretty far behind. As a result, Jimi Hendrix, the supposed headliner closing the show, finally took the stage at 9 in the morning the following day on Monday. He ended up playing to a crowd that had thinned to a fraction of its Saturday peak, and when he finally walked off, 4 days of noise and mud went suddenly oddly quiet. Back in Burbank, California, a couple weeks later, Fred Weintraub finally sat down to actually watch what his crew had brought home, and what he saw wasn't the disaster the boardroom had braced for. Released in 1970, the Woodstock Festival movie won the Academy Award for Best Documentary the following year, and between the movie and a best-selling soundtrack album, it helped pull Warner Brothers back from the financial edge the studio had been standing on. For the festival's own organizers, getting whole again happened in 2 very different speeds. The film and soundtrack's money moved fast, settling roughly 80 lawsuits filed by local farmers and clearing a documented $1.4 million in debt not long after their releases. But John Roberts, the one who'd put his own trust fund on the line that midnight in the mud, said years later he didn't consider himself fully clear of it all until 1980. 11 years on, a slow trickle rather than one clean check. What that muddy, overrun, money-losing weekend actually proved was simpler than any of the chaos suggested. The format worked. People would come in numbers nobody could plan for, and every major outdoor festival that followed, Glastonbury, Burning Man, Coachella, Lollapalooza, all of those exist because Woodstock showed that the demand was real, even though the event that proved it never made a dime doing so. I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the podcast that finds the turning points behind the headlines. To hear more stories like this, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. And if you're enjoying the stories, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a quick review. It helps more people find the story behind the business. And if you want to actually understand business better without the fluff, the buzzwords, or the MBA language, start by visiting businessdailypodcast.com.